tokens are almost fueling the AI engine. So it's kind of like just a car that needs gasoline to run. Obviously, AI models need the tokens to process the information and generate the results. And they're really kind of fundamental units that measure the amount of data processed by an AI model.
I've seen a lot of AI coins. One of them that's really popular is called Render. They're almost like an Airbnb for the CPUs or the GPUs. So you can basically kind of like rent out the certain GPUs. So it's a pretty good business model.
The tricky thing with language models is that everyone sort of phrases questions differently. And so from a caching perspective, it's quite tricky to match a question to an answer. You may say, what are your opening hours this weekend to a store? But Brynley might go, I want to come this weekend, are you open? And so from a caching perspective, those look like very separate questions, even though they're the same. So it would be hard to get hits and make sure that it gets returned. You'd almost need AI to get the inferred meaning of those two questions, understand they're the same, and understand that this response matched both.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Make an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Makoto Kern. I've got Brynley Evans and Joe Kraft with me again. Hey guys.
Hey,
so
good to be back.
Yeah, so today the topic that we're going to be discussing is the 5 gotchas when integrating AI into software.
And that's a good one, because I think we're kind of having a chance on all the projects we've worked on to add a little bit of insight into what we're busy with and what we found as interesting potential gotchas as working through kind of a lot of early technology, watching the tech advance and just being able to weigh in on, what is it you should be looking out for? So, looking forward to going through this.
Brynley, would you like to kick us off with the first topic of token cost management?
This is a fun one, tokens. Tokens is, I always struggle to get a grasp on it because it's sort of this bizarre sort of measurement of AI currency in some way. And I thought, let me just start off and kind of level set with tokens. So if there are any of our listeners that are still thinking, what is a token? I was trying to come up with some analogies that would help everyone or at least get a handle on these. One of them is really thinking like tokens are almost fueling the AI engine. So it's kind of like just a car that needs gasoline to run. Obviously, AI models need the tokens to process the information and generate the results. And they're really kind of fundamental units that measure the amount of data processed by an AI model. So, that's the sort of count of the pieces of text, whether it's words or characters that the model reads or generates. So if we look at things like, well, how do tokens work? So imagine them almost like digital currency. So each time you make a transaction, and transactions are sort of the inputs or outputs from the model, you spend a certain amount of this currency. So in large language models or language models in general, a single token represents as little as one character or as much as a word. So there's not a finite sort of grasp, which makes it sort of tricky to get a handle on. It's very much down to that specific text. Looking at, what are the gotchas then when you're building this? Well, something you should do if you're building AI into a project is look at cost estimations. So how many users are you going to have? How many tokens are you going to be spending? And there are some quite handy token sort of calculations. So if you're sending specific requests to the model or information, you can actually get a handle on how many tokens you'll use. So sort of coming up with an estimation and a sort of budget, I guess, allocating a budget to say, this is how much we're expecting to use as our user base grows. Very important, because it's all good saying, right, we want to do this, but we realize that this is going to burn through thousands of tokens per user, and we're looking at getting over 1 million users. It's going to get expensive. And that's where you can look at, well, maybe there are other ways of doing this. So like we've chatted about before, small language models and things, even some of the large language models that you can run and self-host could be an option in this regard to really sort of minimize the amount you're actually spending on that.
Quick question on that. Does like OpenAI, Copilot, do they charge do they charge like a token-based system when you're using their models?
So any of the models will have a set cost, and that cost will, Joe, we've done a lot of kind of looking into the costs, and I know you can kind of add a lot here, but just looking at ChatGPT 4 to 3.5 Turbo to 4.0 the costing is so different, and each of those kind of have a set cost.
I was going to say, do you have a rough idea of what that price may be? Are they giving a discount for a 2-for-1 sale or anything?
Is a 2-for-1 sale? That was a 2-for-1 sale. That cut it in half. Joe, can you remember those figures? Because we've been looking at them just last week. It's from cents in the dollar to microcents.
Yeah, it's like 0.03 cents now. It used to be 0.06 cents per 1,000 tokens. So they have kind of like a scale how it all works out. But I think it is important as a business, especially, to understand these costs. As a user, someone just using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or any of the kind of public services out there, you generally just charge a flat fee, and they're trying to sort of, guesstimate how much general users start using applications. And if you're a business, I think the more interesting cost is, okay, as your costs scale up around your token usage, if you're giving your users, the ability to generate a lot of tokens, then how do you wrap that up and sort of, make that a cost for your actual end users? You don't really want to push it onto them. You kind of want to make your costing simple, again, like wrap it up into a certain amount so they can go, okay, our budget that we would be paying for your service would be, $200 a month. But what do you do then as a business to make sure that doesn't scale out, or that you're not aware of what they could be doing? And I don't know if you have any ideas. I have a few of myself, Bryn, but I don't know if you have some points ready that you want to go over around that, or if you have any thoughts on currently what are the best ways to sort of manage those tokens?
Yeah, I mean, the only point that I really wanted to stress here, and maybe one I'll jump into now, is kind of monitoring of that and budgeting. So if you've come up with that sort of set budget, you've got an idea of your projected token usage, then you've got to be, properly monitoring and setting alerts and setting budget caps. So you can imagine a scenario that I was looking at here is, imagine when we've seen so many AI startups. So, you've got this great idea, you're using, let's say, OpenAI, using another one of the big large language models. You get going with it, you integrate it into your application. You see that the users love the AI features. They start, using your app. Engagement is skyrocketing. Then one day you wake up to an Azure bill of 50K overnight, and your startup's in serious problems. And of course, it could have all been prevented with some decent budgeting and setting kind of caps in services like Azure. But you can't really stress enough how important that is, because if you've got a minor glitch in your app's code and it's triggering a loop, and that causes something to hit the AI service repeatedly, you would rack up millions of tokens in a few hours. And if you're not monitoring it closely, you don't have a tight budget set, then you're getting that 50K bill or more, which is not something you want to be dealing with. So I think that's easily avoided, and it's just through kind of proper cost management, solutions and setting those budgets. So that's kind of the main point that I wanted to drive home. I think under token cost management is around that. I know, Joe, I'm sure you got some points to add to that.
Yeah, I can talk a few things there that you can do to manage that further, or at least to reduce them. And I think it's also important to realize, as you said earlier, with the model changes, the token costs are going down dramatically. So competition in the AI space is huge right now. All the major players are all competing against each other. That's why the token costs keep getting lower and lower. So maybe in like a few years, they'll be so minute. It's almost, an irrelevant cost overall, unless you're scaling out to hundreds of thousands of users. It may not even be such a big thing in a year or two. Right now, it definitely is. So it's worth watching it. But yeah, we'll see how that space works. The other side of it too is we're kind of talking again, when we're talking about token costs specifically around cloud services. So for instance, Azure OpenAI or OpenAI Direct, they are charging on their API usage per token costs. But as a business, if your infrastructure is large enough, you can always self-host these models. You talked about, the small language models and things like that. You could self-host, but you can even host the full larger models like, Llama and Cloud and those sort of, obviously OpenAI is proprietary, but there are open source alternatives out there that you could self-host. What token cost is really actually coming down to is the processing, right, to actually get that response out of the model. And that's how, that's sort of built in tokens. So your processing costs will then become your main consideration, right? So if you're self-hosting that model in your own cloud infrastructure or on-prem, then you need the hardware and the capable hardware to sort of, get those responses quickly. So your costing will change, or the way you'll think about it will change from, okay, around tokens to more around, okay, what's infrastructure costs around this? That's a separate sort of way you could look at it too. And then thirdly, really just designing your AI in a way that your token costs don't scale out crazily, right? And that all comes down to prompting and what you're really building your AI model for. So if it's an AI that's answering user questions, you can prompt it to say, be succinct, be short. So we can even cap out that token. So eventually, as part of the APIs, you can make sure they don't go over a certain limit, like there's a hard breakpoint. So you can try and structure your prompts to make sure that at least the responses going back to users are succinct, and it's not trying to generate, a book of information for a simple user's question, which is a big thing. And then the second part of that is making sure that your AI is engineered just for that purpose, and users aren't trying to bypass that. So if you have an assistant that's just answering questions, you want to prompt it and engineer it that just does that. You don't want users to go, oh, cool, they've just given me this whole language model. Let me use it for my own means, and I can start asking it to write me books, or summarize this 10-page document for me, and then sort of tasks outside of what your model was originally designed to do, which would then obviously use way more tokens. So those strategies too can make a big difference.
What was that car dealer scenario where a car dealer implemented ChatGPT and someone asked it to write Python for them?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. There's a great example. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Someone on the side, you're like, wait, we're supposed to be selling cars, not writing Python books.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's really funny.
If your AI, let's say, answers the same question over and over again, is that something that you can cache the answer and it doesn't have to pull from the AI, or doesn't matter?
No, unfortunately, right now, I think maybe there's services out there that do that, but at least the major ones that I've been using don't seem to offer any sort of caching. I think that'd be something that you would want to, as a middle layer, implement yourself, and you would then cache the questions that are coming in, cache the responses. That's something that you would self-manage. And then if you see a question come in that you see it's been answered, check the cache. If we have a hit that matches it, just return that. The tricky thing with language models is that everyone sort of phrases questions differently. And so from a caching perspective, it's quite tricky to match a question to an answer. You may say, what are your opening hours this weekend to a store? But Brynley might go, I want to come this weekend, are you open? And so from a caching perspective, those look like very separate questions, even though they're the same. So it'd be hard to get hits and make sure that it gets returned. You'd almost need AI to get the inferred meaning of those two questions, understand they're the same, and understand that this response matched both. So right now there's nothing out there, but I think that'd be great. So I mean, it would be awesome to see if they implement things like that.
That's where we're seeing sort of hybrid models as well, where you can take something, a product like Microsoft Copilot, and actually use sort of scripted flows for that, and sort of have a balance between, right, do you have a scripted flow? If so, you're still going to get charged a bit in terms of messages, which are kind of, Copilot's currency in some ways, but, you probably can at least have a scripted response with a whole lot of different trigger phrases and not have to, use tokens. But it's just one approach to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you, in your, obviously blockchain and crypto is kind of a bigger thing with the Bitcoin halving that just happened recently in April. And, I'm just curious if there's have you seen anything or have read anything about the token management and the crypto coins that are involved with that by any chance?
That's not something that I've dug into yet, but that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, there's been some, dabbling that I've done, but I've seen a lot of AI coins, and just a lot of it is one of them that's really popular is called Render. They're almost like an Airbnb for the CPUs or GPUs. So you can basically kind of like rent out the certain GPUs.
Interesting.
If you need it for, So it's a pretty good business model. But I'm just wondering, because I know there are other, I think there's like Ocean and some other coins that basically help the management of that. So it's just, it'd be interesting to dive deeper into some of that and how it's being managed.
Yeah, we definitely need to look into that. Sounds good. But I don't know that was pretty much everything I had for the first gotcha on our list, first of the 5, which was token cost management.
Well, let's look at the second gotcha.
Nice.
Security and privacy. Joe, you want to take this away?
Yeah. So For this one, it's an interesting discussion because it comes up quite a bit, especially around both those topics, security and privacy. But I think so what I want to try and do, at least in this side of things, is, there's been discussions before around that. Really, security comes down to, where are my models being stored? Who has access to them? Is that if I'm using OpenAI, is my data being sent up to OpenAI? So those are kind of like the common questions coming out right now, and there's all ways that those can be answered. But I looked into this a bit, and there's a few very specific AI kind of gotchas in a way that are interesting to think about because it's a space in itself. So what I've seen, again, just going back, a lot of the security questions that I've seen come up are kind of standard IT questions in a way. It's not a new space. It's like, who has access to this? Where are we storing, the endpoints to access this? And these are all kind of, whether it's a model or a database, it's the same sort of thing. Where's your data going? Do you have access to data? Are you sure you're okay giving that third party your data? What are their terms of how they manage that? These are common things been around in IT for years. But I've got a few here which are kind of specific to AI, and I thought they're pretty interesting. So I'll read out the description of what each of these are, and then if you guys have thoughts on that, you can let me know. But it is interesting. So the first one around security is something called adversarial attacks. And what it says is that AI models can be tricked by adversarial examples. So input data that has been intentionally designed to cause a model to make a mistake. So, for instance, you could ask the model questions, but manipulate it to actually answer incorrectly or to make mistakes or to give incorrect answers, which then, as a malicious user, you could then use as, sort of ways of trying to get around certain systems or state that the information that you received from that company was incorrect and, say it affected your business itself or something like that. So it's an interesting security consideration. Yeah.
Is that the same as jailbreaking, in terms of trying to get around the prompts?
It is. It's very similar, right? So it's basically, that's exactly what happened to that car manufacturer, right? So someone got around it, made it do things it wasn't meant to do. In that case, they were just sort of messing around with it. But I think someone else played with it and actually convinced it was an entirely different car company. And they were booking in their car for a service, which was a Honda dealership, but their car was like a Tesla. And so it was like, sure, we'll take in your Tesla. We service Teslas all day. And so, yeah, just completely confusing the AI and sort of, and if the bigger problem with that is that if that's integrating with your backend systems, especially, then it might be feeding data into your backend systems, which is totally corrupt, misaligned, or, creating, maybe cheap entries for something that could have cost a lot. So yeah, it's an interesting one to think about, and that's very specific to AI models and how they understand what you as a user want.
Yeah, especially around somebody's trying to hack into a system. I'm curious of how I guess viral something like that can take, because obviously you have your local or your agents or whatever that's current for your business. But does that somehow get back to, let's say, OpenAI, where somebody's sitting there and training this AI who has malicious intent to say, oh, when somebody's doing this to hack into or go into our system, just ignore it. It's a false positive or whatever.
Yeah.
Does that train a larger language model into that somehow, or does it just stay within the agent, or does it just depend?
Yeah, there's loads of strategies around that defense against that. I think the biggest ones are adversarial training, which is really, as you were just mentioning there, sort of training the model to understand what looks like malicious inputs and, either not processing them or, just blocking them entirely. Or you could have layers before you even reach your model that sort of goes through those inputs, what people are asking it, and actually, even goes out to a separate model and maybe, determines the intent of that. And if it looks like it's matching up with sort of malicious training that it's seen in the past. So yeah, it's all just about making sure that what goes into your model, you've taken a good look at, not just letting anyone do whatever they want or send through anything that they want.
I know we've looked at a few of those Microsoft services that, as you're saying, Joe, act as layers to basically, even before you're interacting with the model, to say, all right, does this have bias? Does this have prejudice? Does it have malicious code? If it is, okay, it's stopping right there before it's even getting to the model. And then even coming back from the model and saying, all right, is this answer, meeting all the the specific criteria from a safety and sort of ethical, I guess, standpoint, which is interesting.
If Facebook's trying to train their models on all their users, it might go a certain slant that, yes, most users agree with this political stance, and that's just what it thinks, but it's not true at all because the source data is being manipulated.